I'm honored to be here. I'm honored to be able to host this program. I think that this is an incredibly important program, being able to connect what's happening in Ferguson, such a pivotal moment in time and in history. Wanting to make sure that we are holding Michael Brown, and we are holding what's happening around the country, and we are also holding it with what's happened here in our own community. So I'm holding Michael Brown's name close to me, and I'm also holding it with the names of Keaton Otis and Aaron Campbell and Kendra James and James Jahar Perez and every other individual who has died here at the hands of police violence and murder.
And perhaps you asked that question, why did we ask you to come here today? Number one, we ask you to come because the issues we are facing are issues that crosses all boundaries that have been erected by man, be it through ethnicity, social status, locale, and you name any other descriptor you want to use. The issue of police accountability, excessive force, crosses all of those boundaries. To the many disparities of treatment and little to no movement or concern of the tragedy of life as a result of excessive and or abusive power by some law enforcement officers who are not held accountable, and because of that lack of accountability and that self-defeating Byzantine accountability system that we have must be changed if we're going to change and achieve anything.
I had the opportunity to be in Ferguson, Missouri during some of the marches that were going on at the time. I was in the process of doing a revival for a pastor friend of mine in St. Louis, and we ended up participating and engaging in the marches in Ferguson, Missouri. I can remember the spirit of the atmosphere. It reminded me a lot as a child of the civil rights movement and the post-civil rights movement. The atmosphere of the spirit, the determination, the cries, the pain, the anger, the joy, and the unity of those who are out there and leading the march and those that were out there participating in the marches. It just so happened that in the destiny of God that he put me in contact with one of the major young clergy leaders of the Ferguson uproar for justice and freedom and equality. I was intentionally walking down the street in preparation for the march, and there was a group of young clergy that were gathered together with their leader at the forefront, and they began to speak, and they called my pastor friend and I over, and they asked me to pray, and that was the beginning of that process. I thank God for this young speaker. I thank God for his courage, his leadership. He was there in the 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. Now I want you to understand that in what was going on in Ferguson, marches went on from 5 o'clock in the afternoon to 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. And there was a young group of clergy led by our speaker and many other youth and young adults that were participating there, that were out there, that were confronting the tear gas, confronting the armored vehicles, confronting the officers in terms for their right to petition their government and to call for justice for Michael Brown. I was amazed, and it reminded me a lot of being a young son of the civil rights movement and the post-civil rights movement, of the courage of these young people, because this movement was a movement of young people. It was a movement of young clergy, young adults and young workers that would mix with adults and others from Ferguson and St. Louis and from across the country. And this leader that was in term living leadership, he was the one that led the march around the corner when the first tear gas started. He was the one that led the march around the corner when the first breaking out of the armored vehicles and the M16. His courage and strength was an example to his community and to the nation in facing the racism and the issue of police abuse and police accountability.
In the few days that I've been here in Portland, I've fallen in love with your city. I've fallen in love because not only the landscape that give us the different topography where we can be in the mountains one minute, rolling across a bridge the next, watching some of the great changing in colors from the leaves. But more importantly, as I look into this audience, which is a representation of who you all are, I'm watching the unity of blacks and whites and Latino and gay and lesbian, male and female sitting together in unity. And if I can just say that as much as I've been asked to come and share with you all have touched my soul to the depths of it in the manner in which I cannot wait to go back to a city that is completely divided and share with St. Louis how far behind we are. And so if I never give you anything, I want you all to know that you all have given me so much hope already that in 2014, the dream of Dr. King is yet alive here in Portland, Oregon, and for that you ought to give yourselves a round of applause. A few things about Ferguson. If I can simply say what launched me to the forefront when the cameras came into our city, and I was crazy enough to say to Dr. Jesse Jackson and to Al Sharpton and to all those outsiders, please leave my city. And of course you all know how news reporters are. They like controversy, and because I'm not smart enough to understand everything that comes out of my mouth, I say, yeah, I said it and I ain't taking it back. But what I was saying and what we've been saying in our city, and I'm sure you all had the same experience, is that we were tired of folks who were looking for a photo opportunity to come in with their capes on and with their armored vehicles and say a good speech, take up an offering, and then leave our city as bad as it was when they came. And so the message then and the message now is, this is our problem. This is our city. And if I can today say the same to not only Portland, but to all Oregonians and to even the rest of the world, that this is our problem. What's happening in St. Louis and in Ferguson, that little city that really had no recognition until now, it belongs to us. But if I can clearly make it known when I say us and our, I'm talking about we, the people. It is a phrase that we can find in the preamble of our Constitution that starts with those words, we, the people. We're sick and tired of these United States not being united anymore. This is my problem, Portland. It's your problem. It's our problem that in order for us to form a more perfect union or to establish justice, tranquility, or to ensure domestic tranquility, we had better come back together as one and to begin to provide for the common defense of all mankind. Whether we're Republican or Democrat, every human being must begin to matter, and it has to become everyone's problem. One of the things that really plagues me at 40 years old, because folks say this is the young folks issue, and I don't know where I fall. I feel like I'm somewhere stuck in the middle. I still can dunk a basketball, so I try to hang with the young folk, and I can wear a suit well enough to sit with the old folks. But we have to understand that in Ferguson, it's not just the 17-year-old who's upset. It's not a young problem. It's a people problem. We have forgotten to promote the general welfare of all Americans. Like the homeless man we met at the Safeway over on Shady Boulevard, who was asking for a few nickels, as though that will really change his situation. Our problem is like John and James, the men we met in the store when we were buying baseball caps, who said that they were glad that Dr. Haynes and I took time to talk to them so that they can reconnect their relationship with Christ Jesus. This is our problem. It's a problem of the people, and regardless of where we live or from whence we've come, whether we are of the African diaspora like Sister Constance, who just decided that she needs someone to daily give her some type of inspiration. If it's from, whether you're from the Indian country like my brother on the front row, who says that the vision that I see of injustice is no different than yours. Whether you are of the Caucasian persuasion like Brother Patrick, who is sometimes and oftentimes confused or even ignored. It doesn't matter where you're black or white, male or female. The problem is the same, because what unites all of us is the blood that runs through our vein and make us all human. This is a humanity issue, and we must come together, as Dr. King said, that when we realize that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And I say today, Portland, that injustice to any of us has to become a threat to justice to all of us. Ferguson is a result of the disunity of humanity. What happens in New York on a daily basis and seem to often be ignored is a result of the disunity of humanity. Our news feeds have made us immune to death. I don't know about you all, but our local news for the first 20 minutes talks about who got shot, who got robbed, who got maimed, and who's already dead. That's not news. That's disgusting. That's inhumane for us to sit there with our eyes wide open, showing our children how we don't budge or cringe at one young man or woman being shot in the streets. It has become a humanity problem. We've missed what the Bible said, do unto others as we will have it done unto us. We have separated generations. The gap is wider 50 years later after the dream speech than it was prior to there ever was a Dr. Martin Luther King. So my purpose today is to remind each of you that what's happening in Ferguson is just as much your problem as it is mine. And so as we talk about police brutality, the influx of coppers coming down on the people and the occupation of a neighborhood by tanks, the use of tear gas on domestic soil when we are illegal. It's illegal for us to use tear gas in international warfare. What has happened to our country? What has happened is that the people have conceded to the established power. And the great words of Frederick Douglass said that power concedes nothing without a demand. And so I would like to encourage us today. Let's demand proper education for all people. Let's demand that the police in the community become a part of the community, or the community will begin to police them. Let's take back what is rightfully ours, and that is the freedom, the justice, and the liberty of all men. What happened in Ferguson? It's not necessarily what we're waiting for the decision to come back from. It's not necessarily the leaks that have been given about who shot first and who did what first. What happened is there was a disconnect. There was a disconnect from two human beings being able to communicate properly. And let me say this as I sit down and do whatever is next. St. Louis has a race issue. America has a race issue. How is it that a man can kill 2 state troopers in the state of Pennsylvania knowing to be armed and dangerous, and he is going to see his day in court? But a young man who had no weapon and had his hands up was shot like a dog in the streets. We have an issue. And what has to happen is what has been taking place today, what took place when Dr. Haynes prayed for us, is that those of us who have similar issues must join forces with each other until we must tell everyone who stands in positions of power that we're not going to take it anymore. With the system being set up the way it is with all 92 municipalities, it's so easy for a young man to become a felon simply by running a stop sign. Because the system is set up so that you can become a victim of running a stop sign, and about 5 or 6 fines later you are a felon, which takes your right to vote away. And what has happened is a lot of folks have had the desire to vote. And so what we've done is we've gotten those felons and we've partnered with persons who can vote. And their job, since they cannot vote, is to educate those who can vote on the policies and the procedures and people that are running.
I'm just going to go to one of the written questions from Marilyn Keller, actually. So it says, I was in St. Louis in September. I observed no cohesion within the community on this issue. Has anything changed?
Your observation is dead on. It was dead on. St. Louis is the most segregated city I've ever lived in. I was born and raised there, but I've had the pleasure of going to college in Baltimore, working in California, living in Colorado, and so I've visited our country. St. Louis is still black and white. And we're probably raised to be divided. It's just part of our culture there. So what you saw was what I've deemed the leapfrog theory, where organizations have popped up and sprung up, and we're watching to see what one person does so the next day we can leap over them and do something better and different. But the first thing I learned by hanging out with Dr. Bethel and Dr. Haynes is without a coalition, without a collaborative effort, the Department of Justice, every 92 municipalities, and every person in power that doesn't want change, they're going to always win. And so I'm going back and dedicating my life to go sit with the NAACP, the Urban League, the 100 Black Men, the Latino community, the Caucasian community, the Muslims, the Jews, the blacks, the white. I'm going to go make it my business to meet with every last one of these organizations and saying we have got to follow the example of Portland, and we've got to come together to fight a common enemy. So the second part of your question, is it better? It's a lot better, but we got a long way to go. One of the things that this generation suffers from is the disconnect of previous generations. Those ages 18 or 15 through probably 25, these are the grandbabies of crackheads. And the problem is that the crack epidemic removed an entire generation of grandmothering. When I was raised and my mother was a heroin addict, my grandmother wasn't a drug addict. And so my grandmother was able to care for me and receive respect and responsibility and indwell a system of heritage in me. Well, now these grandmothers are strung out on drugs. And so there's a 2-generation gap because mom is sick, grandmom is sick, and great-grandmother is dead. Then they attacked us in the school with Ritalin and all of these HD, AD, ABC drugs, which if you all know anything about me, they would have gave me a heavy dose of it in the 70s and 80s. What Clergy United has tried to explain to our city is there is no one solution to this mass problem. The light bulb go out and say, oh, it's economic. They forget about the drugs. Oh, it's educational. And they forget about the learning disabilities. So we have already partnered with some medical professionals. We've gone to the University of Missouri St. Louis and to Harris Stowe State College, which is a historically black university. And they've loaned us some of their resources to right now we're dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder with the young folks in the middle school and the elementary school that we have adopted. Watch this. I shared this with the preachers the other day. While I was praying, the Lord said, pastors need this same care. And so psychologically, we have forgotten how much it takes for a man or a woman of God to be in the streets every day. I have a full-time job. I have 4 children. I have a church to take care of. But I was out in Ferguson. And so the PTSD is real for those of us who are in the struggle. And what we cannot do is make victories in education and ignore the economic portion, or make victories in economic portions and ignore the mental portion. In a struggle of the magnitude that Ferguson is, none of us, because we're so separated, can identify with everybody's issue. And so that's why you have the pockets of groups forming. What I like about the Lost Voices is that they decided that we're going to sleep outside until folks hear our cry. And they did it the first few days with no support. It took organizations like us who realized that as it were raining, they were sleeping outside. We offered them tents. And other organizations that realized that they hadn't eaten or couldn't have eaten if they were sitting in this space for the last 24 hours. And they began to bring them food. And then as the police moved them, because they said they were loitering, and moved them, there was a business in the area that offered his space so that they can stay there without being harassed. However, as I've learned, because trust and believe, I've been angry as well.
Reverend White, you mentioned the LGBT community. How do you see their role with the church in this struggle?
I've been pastoring for 5 years. I served as an associate pastor for 7 years prior to that. Of the 12 years of leadership in the church, I have to humbly submit and say I probably spent 10 years changing those locks that I spoke of. I don't know if the platform of dialogue in my city has been embraced to really be able to answer that question fairly. What I have learned in the last 2 years in sitting down with some ministers and pastors in the LGBT community is that there is just as much common ground in their struggle as it is in ours. But just like any group, how we can help one another is not deal with where we're different, but unite where we're the same. And then eliminate that adversary that keeps us from focusing, Sister saying, keep our eyes on the prize, is when we find out where we are the same, and if we focus on that prize, then that'll just eliminate one more headache for both of us. So what we can do is start to listen and dialogue and communicate with the community at large, and then really open up our doors and allow them free access to the churches, and quit being so ignorant. And I'll leave it at that.
The first song that I wanted to sing is a song from our gospel heritage. It was written by Mrs. Dottie Rambo in 1957, and it speaks to our level of grace and mercy that we exist under here in this country. As African Americans, we were imbued with a religion, the Christian religion, that helped us free ourselves, first spiritually and mentally from slavery, and then literally from slavery. Amazing grace shall always be my song of praise, for it was grace that bought my liberty. I do not know just how he came to love me so. He looked beyond all my fault and saw my need.